I really appreciate it. So good evening, I'm Rachel Platt, and we're coming to you from the second floor of the Frazier History Museum. And what you're seeing behind me is what used to be the face of the Town Clock Church. This is one of the older faces that was removed. And I want to let you know the church is still there. It's in New Albany, and it's about a block from the Ohio River. And the Ohio River, of course, the dividing line back in the day between free states like Indiana and slave states like Kentucky. The church was an integral site for those who were seeking freedom, and so was the Ohio River. And that started the discussion that launched into this project. Can you imagine sitting on the Kentucky side and seeing freedom with just a river between you and freedom? Tonight's program deals with a project that the Frazier History Museum has been part of for more than a year now. It is called the Unknown Project. The Frazier is humbled to partner on this project with Ideas xLab, Roots 101, the City of Louisville, and two artists who are bringing this project to life, William M. Duffy and Dave Cottle. We're going to be talking about the reconciliation benches in just a few minutes, and how the Ohio River is so important to this work. All of these partners are joining me tonight: Josh Miller and Hannah Drake from Ideas xLab, Lamont Collins from Roots 101, Sarah Lindgren, the Public Arts Administrator from Louisville Metro Government, and the two artists that I just mentioned. Now, tonight's discussion is part of the racial reckoning that continues in our country, with the site of the dedication of these benches happening on Juneteenth, this Saturday. The synergy of that, of course, is very deliberate. We're going to give you all of those details, including times and speakers during this program. And for the very first time, the City of Louisville will honor the Juneteenth holiday as a day off for all city employees. The first time that's ever happened here in Louisville. Juneteenth, just for a little history lesson, the combination of the month of June and the 19th of June, marking the date in 1865, when Union soldiers enforced the Emancipation Proclamation and freed all remaining slaves in Texas on June 19th, 1865. These images that you're looking at right there are from Galveston, Texas. It is a day set aside for people to celebrate freedom and equal rights. But as we all know, that fight for justice continues, and Kentucky's reckoning with race and slavery is a very complicated one. And we know parts of tonight's conversation will be difficult. I want to begin, though, with a question for our audience to get a feel for where we are with you in this discussion of race. So when it comes to racial reckoning, where do you think we are in this discussion? Take a look at the question there and answer. Is it A, just getting started with a long way to go? B, making some progress in addressing the past and the future? C, making good progress in addressing the past and the future? Or D, you're not sure there really can be a reckoning? We're going to give you a few seconds to fill in the answer, then we're going to get the conversation started and let you know tonight we also have a really special video from Hannah Drake that we're going to be showing as well tonight. So let's let everybody go ahead and weigh in the audience. We'll bring up the response here. So when it comes to racial reckoning, where do you think we are in the discussion? 48% say just getting started with a long way to go. 38% say making some progress in addressing the past. 10% say making good progress. And 3% say they're not sure there can be a reckoning. So just getting started with a long way to go is 48%. I want to start with our panelists now and to have you talk about those results that you just saw, and then I want you to answer the question. Hannah, let's start with you. Surprised by those results at all?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I think America, Kentucky, America as a whole is really just getting started with a long way to go, and this has been centuries. And I think what we saw last year, something I've never seen in my lifetime. It seemed like, and in fact it was, that every single state participated in some form of protest with the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. And I believe it was 18 countries across the world were also protesting. But we are just getting started. There's a lot of reckoning to be done, and just a lot of acknowledging what has happened. And we see pushback with even teaching the true history of race in America, but it's what happened, and it needs to be taught. We won't reckon with anything until we start speaking the truth.
So if you had to answer that question, where are we in the discussion? Would you also say just getting started?
Yes, I would have picked that one, just getting started. Yep.
All right, Josh, how about you?
I agree with what Hannah said. I think when I looked at the four options, I chose the first one as well. And I think similarly, last year really demonstrated how much room we have and work to do. I think back to even, I think it was 2 years ago, I was listening to it. I'm pretty sure it was a Hidden Brain episode. And they were talking about, all things constant, how many decades is it going to take for America to make a lot of progress when it comes to racism? And I think they projected 150 years. So I think we have a tremendous amount of work to do. And that's why projects like Unknown Project and these collaborations across organizations and in the community, I think, are really important.
All right, Lamont, let's have you weigh in.
Well, I agree with everybody up to this point that it's a slow progress. We talk about Emancipation Proclamation, we talk about Juneteenth as being a day of freedom. But Black people may be free, but we're still dealing with freedom. We're still dealing with the inequities in this country, the injustices in this country. So we may be free today, but freedom is still what we're seeking. And we have not reached that goal as citizens of the United States.
And Sarah, how about you?
Well, I have to be with the 38% a little bit. I have to hope that we're making some progress. I'm also not surprised by the largest percentage being that we're not sure, we're just getting started on this process. Having watched racial reckoning over the past few years from the standpoint of an arts administrator and many public meetings about public art and monuments, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by that percentage going with we have a long way to go. I think a lot of us are still dealing with confusion and dealing with shame in the process where we need to be able to move into openness, open minds, open hearts as we approach the subject.
Thank you, Sarah. And I guess me saying William, I'm so used to calling you Duff in all our conversations. Are you okay with that?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, your thoughts on this?
I go with the first answer beyond that. Even public art in probably the last 15 years or so has really dealt with it. We got a long way to go. The taking down of a lot of those Confederate pieces, sculptures, have they've sort of settled one side of things, but I feel like I wouldn't say destroy them, but keep them within reach, and that goes along with allowing works by the African American artists to sort of address the things that have been put up and have been up for over 100 or so years, and it's time to sort of level the whole playing field and say, okay, well, this is your side, but this is the way we see things. It's just becoming, it's just becoming to the point where we can express our ideas and tell our story. It's just starting. So I think that's where we stand now. And as a Black artist, that's where I stand. I want to tell more of these stories. You know, when I was in art school, I was pretty much sort of arm twisted into not telling these stories. But one of the things that they taught us in school is to draw and create what you know. So it was kind of a paradox for me. It's like, well, you want me to do this, I'm trying to do this, but you don't want me to tell the story. You know, it was one of those things of, well, there's more to life than this. But for me, as a Black person, as an artist, I'm just doing what I know, and so I'm just, to me, we're just reaching the point where the story is being told, but there needs to be more of it.
Thank you, Duff. And we're going to talk to you about that expression and the reconciliation benches and how you came to decide what that was going to look like, that design and your thought process with that. And Dave, finally, let's get you to weigh in, please, on that question, where you think we are in this discussion.
I'm an optimist, and I believe that we've made some progress, but that does not say that we don't have a long way to go. I understand completely the frustration and the sadness that comes with the reality of where we are in time. And I'm participating in this project because I want to be a part of the effort to change that.
And it's interesting, some of the people in our audience are, you know, your perspective is hard for the rest of America to face. That's why I'm part of the 3%. There won't be a reckoning until the truth of injustice is acknowledged. So people are saying, you know, people have a hard time facing that truth that we're talking about tonight. So we'll continue to talk about that in this discussion. But as we move forward to understand what led to the Unknown Project, you first need to understand some of Kentucky's history with slavery. There are markers, as I'm sure most people have seen in downtown Louisville, that actually show where slaves were traded. The majority of slaves in Kentucky were concentrated in Louisville and Lexington. Lamont Collins with Roots 101, give us a little bit more of the history of Kentucky as a border state with slavery, if you don't mind.
Don't mind at all. Kentucky definitely was a border state, which means it bred men and women to be sold. You know, there was a saying about going down the river where they would ship them to harder labor camps of cotton and places like that, or Alabama. So, but in Kentucky, it was a breeding state. It was a border state that bordered the other bordering states. But the reality of our history is Kentucky made money off of selling slaves, as if you raise money off of a pedigree of an animal, or cat, dog, or horses as we know it. That's the hard history of America, of Kentucky. And the other part is that, like Garrison, who was a known slave broker, who was well known in the community and made millions of dollars within that time frame breeding slaves. And matter of fact, he had a business card that said slave broker, just like he was in business and property. So that's the history of Kentucky that we cannot get away from. When we talk about the Ohio River, which we call the River Jordan, symbolically being the freedom to Indiana, we also have to talk about, because you got to the Indiana, slave patrols went to bring you back. So it wasn't because you hit the shore of Indiana, you were free, not at all. Right. The police system that we have today chased after Black people to bring them back, which means that the police system itself, when we talk about today's time, Black people ran from police force, white people owned the police force, and that's historical fact.
And tracing those roots back to that. Did somebody else want to weigh in there?
I think if I can chime in, Rachel, on the second picture you showed, it was of one of the markers, and I believe it was the second one that said slavery was abolished in 1865. Right. But in fact, the truth is, in Kentucky, that was not the date, right? So this sign here, that's historical, doesn't tell the truth. That did not happen in Kentucky. Yeah, what happened in Kentucky is Kentucky voted against abolishing slavery. They ratified it in 1976, which was the year that I was born. That's what happened. And so if Kentucky wants to celebrate Juneteenth, Kentucky must first celebrate the fact that you as a state voted against abolishing slavery. That's history. That's fact. And Kentucky may want to hide it, but Kentucky needs to see. What I would appreciate in Kentucky is if Kentucky stood up and said, our General Assembly voted against abolishing slavery. And today we are trying to make a difference. But I've not heard, and maybe they have, but I've not heard. So while we have all these Juneteenth celebrations across the state, when will someone that is in leadership, preferably today's Kentucky General Assembly, stand up and say, we stood on the wrong side of history, but today we're doing something different? That's how you change things. You don't change it by telling a lie. What's on that sign, it skirts around the truth, but it's not the truth of what happened in Kentucky.
And I have heard some of the commissioners on the Juneteenth Commission talking about exactly what you said, you know.
Well,
with
can I say
reckoning.
something? Can I say something real quick?
Oh, absolutely, Lamont.
You know, the other part of what Hannah was saying about the Kentucky and the history of what we went through, we also have to remember that in Kentucky itself, from slavery itself, even though we never ratified it until the later dates and times, we also continue to support slavery in other states, even when when it was ratified, because of the economic power it brought to us in the river. So we have to remember we never got out of the slave game.
So somebody in the audience just said acknowledgement, which is what you all are saying, acknowledgement of what happened and the truth.
I think, and the monuments that we talked about, the Jefferson monuments and those things, personally, I would love to see the monuments stay and it became an opportunity to teach. Like in baseball where they hit the home runs, but they had an asterisk beside the number. I would love to see the same monuments, the monuments of supremacy, stay up around modern art like Duffy and other artists are doing, and an asterisk explaining the truth of that monument that stayed for so long. I think it's a teaching tool, not a tool to put away, but a tool to teach from. That's what I would love to see.
I
I know
agree.
there's a lot of debate on that. So more on that later, but let's go back to the Unknown Project and the history a little bit about how this project came about. We know the Ohio River. Then I want to talk about two books that kind of helped launch this project as well. The first book we're talking about is I've Got a Home in Glory Land, the story of Lucy and Thornton Blackburn, who escaped slavery in Louisville. They eventually made their way to freedom in Canada. This book was written by Carolyn Smarts Frost. A second book was Freedom Clothes, also about the Blackburns, and that was written by Estella Majoso. The Ohio River was critical to their journey. I had not heard that story before about the Blackburns until I started working here at the Frazier History Museum about 2 years ago, even though there is a marker downtown that talks about the Blackburns. And Hannah, I want to kind of connect the dots a little bit, because when I got here and heard that story, I had seen some of the work that you had done after you had visited Natchez and some other places. And I put a phone call into you and said, come in and let's talk. Have you heard of the Blackburns? And that kind of launched the conversation into the Unknown Project. You'd already been doing the work. We got talking and you thought, this is bigger than just the Blackburns, right? Kind of tell us the thought process of how this got started.
Right. So when you introduced me to the Blackburns, this was a couple that I had never heard of, and just started reading about them and researching. And I remember it, well, one, their life, like I believe it was a home, was discovered in this archaeological dig, right? And so it's just reflective of how things are hidden, right? And so they're digging in Canada and find the remains of this home and start researching, and in fact it is the Blackburns, but they never had any children, and there's no photo of the Blackburns. So people, like Estella, just you kind of have to imagine in your mind how they would have looked. And I was just stunned that for a couple that had escaped and made it to Canada, how I did not know of this couple. Which at that time was coinciding with me visiting the Lynch Museum. in Alabama. And I was determined to take a picture of every pillar that was from Kentucky, and that lists the names of people that were lynched. And in order to be in this museum, you had to lynch over, your state had to lynch over 100 people. And I believe Kentucky had lynched 169 people on record, you know, that we know of. 8 of those people are listed as unknown. And I just was hurt and shocked. And I understand that some names are just lost to history. But at some point, somebody knew their names. They had a name. They weren't recorded as unknown. You know, they had parents, and I'm certain that their parents had given them a name. And it just broke my heart that you could exist in a world and be unknown. And that just started the process of learning more about the Blackburns and learning about slavery in Kentucky and trying to discover these names. And Josh and I started touring, you know, slave cemeteries, and I went to Goshen Farm and stood in this slave cemetery, and the headstones are just rocks. There's no names of the enslaved people. They're just rocks. But who were they? And we visited a Locust Grove as they were starting to try to discover some of the names. And when I visited Locust Grove, my first question was, what were their names? Because if you have nothing else in this world, you have a name. And as they were discovering, and they were still doing the work, and of course several years ago, but at that time, they said some of them are difficult to find because they're recorded as Negro gal, and there's no name attached to this person, or they're recorded for the work that they do, like cook or whatever, you know. And that just didn't sit right with me. And I think that's when we all started thinking, how can we make this project extend beyond the Blackburns? Because as we soon learned, as the names started coming in, there were names all over Kentucky that people submitted to us, who's there, you know, people willingly gave the information that their family did enslave people. And these were the names. And we discovered so many names that were just buried in Kentucky that these families had held on to, and because of this project finally released. And when I see Saturday these names, you know, and this is the last thing I'll say. I remember, I posted this, I remember watching Viola Davis give her Oscar speech, and they asked her, what kind of stories do you want to tell? And she said, go to the cemetery and exhume those stories. And this was just our way of exhuming these stories of a woman we learned named Eve, who the family story was fell in love, but we understand she was enslaved, so with her master. So we understand this was not fell in love. She was being sexually assaulted and had 3 children, and on his deathbed freed her and her 3 children and left her the bed that he died in. And so to see Eve's name etched on this platform, a woman that will not be in any history books, that somehow through this project, we just exhumed her. And Eve was more than this made up story that the family is telling, but this was a Black woman that was enslaved, that was sexually assaulted, that had to have 3 children by her slave master. And on his deathbed, he gave her a bed, and then also gave some other slaves to his children. That's what happened. That's reality. And that is the power of this project, of bringing those stories like Eve to life.
Giving them voices that you talked about, literally exhuming these names and these voices. Josh, what was it that drew you into this? And then you all started applying for grant money. And then that's when this project really, really started taking hold, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So after the conversation with where you all talked about the Blackburns with Hannah, and I think one of the things from their story that really stuck out to me was, like Lamont said, once you got across the river to Indiana, that didn't mean you were free, right? So they had this whole journey up to Canada, and then the slave owner from Kentucky then, and Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, you are more familiar with the details of the story, but then tried to go and appeal to Canada to send them back. And their case specifically helped to establish Canada refusing to, basically making Canada a safe place. If you could get there for enslaved people, Canada would protect you. And so I think that is part of the story of, this couple from Louisville making their way up there. That was a piece that I had never heard either. And that marker, which is, in the vicinity of where the project will be at 4th and Main, I think is one of the things that hopefully more and more people will go see. But I also think about, with Hannah talked about how people were described in some of the letters and in the writing. And I think back to when we were all in Senegal in 2016. So Hannah was there with Roots and Wings. My husband Theo and I were able to go with the group. And in one of the days, we went to Gore Island in a house of slaves off the coast of Dakar. So you were physically standing where captive Africans were held before they were marched through the door of no return onto the ship and carried away to be sold into slavery. And having this full circle moment of that, seeing how painful and how inhumane that space was, to the point where some of the members in the group, like, you could hear their tears and their shrieks like reverberating, like it was extreme suffering and pain in that space. And then to go back to Dakar and to see the Roots and Wings artists participate in a Senegalese naming ceremony. So they were each given a Senegalese name from a cultural leader that they got to meet. So the tradition would have been, as a young person, you would have been named after someone who your family hoped you would have shared traits, or you might pursue the same type of work that they did. And that would actually be a almost mentor-familiar bond. And so really just reiterating such a tie of names to ancestry, to place, to where you come from, and seeing how the artists, while we were there, were reflected in the art, and all of the different sites that we went to, and knowing that when we come back to a place like Louisville, that is not represented here as a space for them. And so I think all of those different things, the work in Natchez, Mississippi, the collaborations here in Smoketown, for example, have all fed into why this is an overdue project, but was an immediate. Hannah and I were texting. It was never a question of if or was I interested, but just how do we work together and collaborate with everybody on here and even beyond this group. And so that then led to applying for the National Endowment for the Arts grant, the Our Town program. Thank you to Sarah for supporting us in that process. Of course, Louisville Metro has to support 2 projects that can submit each year. And so this was one that the NEA said, we want to make the investment in this type of effort, this type of project. And then that allowed us to get to work, and more funders like the Ford Foundation and the Alapa Foundation and others have stepped forward over the past year. And that's brought us to where we are today, finally getting on Saturday to see the On the Banks of Freedom installation that'll feature the really moving benches and installation that Duffy and Dave have been collaborating on.
We're going to get to Duffy and Dave in just a moment with the reconciliation benches and how they came up with that. One thing I did want to point out, because we said some of these discussions would be tough, and hearing the names and the stories, somebody had written in, my great uncle is listed in that museum who was lynched in Tennessee. So even people in our audience directly impacted by this. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and let them know that we saw that. Sarah, with this, talk about public art and how it can be used, and how you're hoping this is going to be used as part of a healing process and a discussion.
Well, I think public art is so powerful, right? It's whether it's conscious or unconscious, those visual cues in our public space affect us, whether that's, statues of white men, or if it's an architectural language or the name of a place, or even the people that are inhabiting the space and how they, came to be permitted in that space or not permitted in that space. All of those visual cues affect us, whether we're aware of it or not. So I think public art is just one part of that. And I think that, you know, over the past few years, as we've had a lot of focus on public art or monuments that are controversial for various reasons, and to me, in my mind, the more important issue is what's missing from that public art landscape. It's obviously we have things that we have to talk about that exist from our history, but there's also a lot missing, right? There's a lot of things that aren't represented in that public art landscape across the city. A lot of stories that are not told. And so I think it boils down to two simple things. One, how significant it is to see oneself represented in artwork and public space, whether that's, you know, very literally like a statue or a painting of someone who looks like you, or if it's more the content or the person creating the artwork that you relate to and find yourself. I think that's really powerful. And then the other very simple concept is the importance of experiencing an identity other than your own through public art. You know, that you see other culture or other types of people that don't look like you, so that we're both finding ourselves in the public art, but we're also seeing the fullness of our community, so that we have both that relationship to self and the relationship to the community through public art. And so I think that, you know, as we can move toward more public art in our environment, where we all can find ourselves and find people that are different from ourselves, that's how we use public art as part of our healing.
So the call went out for artists for these reconciliation benches. So that was kind of predetermined, right, Hannah and Josh, that we wanted benches where people could sit and contemplate and think about that. So benches had been predetermined that was going to be part of it. So then the call went out for artists, and then we have William M. Duffy and Dave Cottle, both selected. I'm going to bring up the image of the bench, the two benches there for people to take a look at. And Duff, let's start with you because it's so powerful. I want people to look toward the bottom just to make sure that everybody understands this. Those are chains on the bottom of the bench. Tell us a little bit how you all came, what process you used to come up with this, and then we'll get a little bit more in depth about the quotes and the images that will be on these benches.
Well, I could say that actually the design of the bench was pretty much Dave's idea, more or less. The chains, you know, represent are supposed to represent a break from that slavery and on to freedom. So what you're seeing here, where the chains are connected or just barely there, have changed. And that is one of the things that we talked about, Dave and I both talked about. If you look at the chains closely, they're just kind of like straight across. And while Dave was actually welding those, he turned to me and said, "Duff, you know, what do you think? Does this look okay?" And I spoke to him and said, "Dave, I think the change should be more relaxed, like they have actually been, you know, like it's been broken free and they're on their way to freedom, or such that it was." So the actual piece itself, the chains are more relaxed and just kind of draped down, and it just, you know, it just has a lot more power to it that way. The granite on the background was just something that I came up with. I just thought, you know, there should be something that speaks to the unknown. You know, we have very little on the known, but not on the unknown. So those portraits on the back of the granite were just composites of people that I saw just thumbing through a bunch of Africans that that really just still had no name or identity. So it's just a composite of different things that I put together and made. It's basically a made up faces. So
and we've got those in just a second. I do want to bring Dave in, and then Duff will show the faces that you were talking about there of a man and a woman. Dave, tell me about the chains. What made you decide? What led you to that? And then we're going to show a couple of the quotes too that people will be seeing on this. But tell us your thought process about you and Duff and what went into this design.
Sure. The chain was initially seen as taking the typical structural format of a brace that would run around the bottom of the bench and turn it into something that was symbolic by turning it into a chain. I think that the change that Duff made was really wonderful and is a good example of how a collaboration really ought to work. But we had hoped from the beginning that this format would enable people who perhaps never even thought of these issues to relate to these people as human beings. And Duff's portraits they're sculpted drawings basically, and they're really strong, they're beautiful, they're clean. I think that they're going to be very effective for a long time.
I want to go to a couple of the quotes that are on there, and Lamont, one of them is one that you had as well. And we can see it right there. We are descendants of kings and queens who were enslaved in America. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I try to make it now and the history of yesterday. And kids need to understand that we just didn't come to America as enslaved people. We came with a history. And that's why I always say we're descendants of kings and queens that were enslaved in America. I think it's a game changer for young Black kids and a game changer for young white kids that don't understand our history.
And then I want to show the other quote, and this is what will be on the backs of those benches. And this is from a young student with JCPS. Countless stories of enslaved people have not been told. Say their names and listen to what you hear. It is time for their legacies to appear. And then you see names on the other side of that. We're going to go to the next slide as well, because those were the faces that we were talking about. Duff, those are the composites that are on the back of the bench, correct?
Correct.
And then I've got some pictures of you and Dave working. What was the most challenging part of this for you two? And had you all done anything on social justice issues like this in the past together?
Dave, you want to take this, or I'll take it?
Go ahead, start.
We had been, I've known Dave since my art school days. And one of the reasons why I spoke up for him to be a partner in this was because I just remember, and he probably doesn't because he's really old now, but I remember going to art school, and it was predominantly a white school, right? So I'm coming in as a freshman, and Dave was either a junior or a senior. It's been so long, I've forgotten now. But one of the things that always struck me that I remember, and I've carried it with me for a long time, was, here was a, upperclassman coming to a freshman and just saying, hey, welcome. If you know Dave's personality, he's just like that. It was just like, welcome, welcome to art school, hope you have a good time and all. And that just really struck me. And so we've been friends since early 70s. So I don't have much experience in the way of doing benches, but Dave has done a number of them over the years. And I was just really struck by just how well they were done. You know, I know there's one set of benches at University of Louisville, and you know, I just really liked how, you know, the placement of it and the material used. I'm a stone carver basically, and Dave works in the metals. And when I saw the benches that he had produced, I thought, well, you know, it's really like a perfect marriage. You know, he could guide me along on, you know, what it takes to do this, and you know, I could lend my end on, you know, stone, which is basically what I work in. So yeah, it was it was a perfect match. Yeah, when I was so glad that Hannah and Josh chose me to do it. And the first thing that you know, came to my mind was Dave Cardell. Yeah, that's who I would like to partner with.
Well, I
I'd like
watched you
to-
all working together. It comes very naturally when I was there observing you that one day. Dave, what would you like to add to this? And did you all learn anything about each other on this project? It's that you probably know a lot about each other already if you've known each other since the 70s. But was there anything that came from this that you learned about one another doing this project together?
Well, I'm not so sure, but I'll think about that as I answer. Duff and I have entered a number of different public art competitions. And so we've been thinking in these terms for a good while. It's just that this is the first one that we landed. But we always saw a partnership as being an important symbol in the process of creating the benches or any other project. And I think that for a lot of people, the personal friendship that bridges boundaries is going to be the way that people start to understand the humanity of other people. And that's the place where change in your heart starts. And Duffy's like a brother to me. I mean, we just have really liked each other for a long, long time. And in terms of what I might have learned about him, I don't know that I really learned anything, you know. I just enjoy working with him.
I love the backstory of your friendship, though, as that being the beginning place. I think that just fits perfectly with the narrative of these benches and the stories that people are trying to tell with this. Hannah, I want to set up now your video, because when people approach the benches, they're going to see this poem that you've written, Finding Me.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting to me because you wrote this before the Unknown Project, this particular one, came to be, correct?
Correct. Yeah,
And
I
it was
wrote
after
it
your
when
travels?
I wrote it when I visited Mississippi. And actually I came back from Senegal and was talking to my mom, and she had told me when she was a little girl she used to pick cotton. And so I was really intrigued to see the cotton fields. And as life would have it with Ido's xLab, they said, oh, well, we're going to Mississippi. And I thought, nah, I ain't going to Mississippi. But but in fact, I did go to Mississippi, to Natchez, Mississippi, and several times, and enjoyed it. But there's this history of slavery there in Forks of the Road, and I visited plantation homes and cotton fields, and I wrote Finding Me because my mom, when I asked her about her grandmother and what her name was, she said, I don't remember her. We just called her Mamie. And I asked her, can you remember anyone else? And she said, no, I can't. And so it was just, there was a part of my mom, and which in turn is now me, that was just lost in these cotton fields. And so I can only trace my family back 2 generations, my mother and her mother. I've never met, of course, which would be my great grandmother. She had passed, and I don't even know her name. And so I just started looking for women and girls named Hannah in slave records and how much they sold for. And I tried to find them. I wanted, where did this name come from? Why am I named Hannah? How did my family end up in Kentucky? And so a part of me found me in those cotton fields. And I found a part of my mom that she very rarely, if ever, talks about. I was in my 40s before she ever told me that she had picked cotton as a little girl. It's something she said that once, and then she won't talk about it anymore. Even when I press her to talk about it, it's not something she wants to talk about. And I wonder how that was for her. She did it from the time she was 9 until she was 12. So for 3 years of her life was spent in these cotton fields where she picked cotton with her grandmother for 80 cents a day. And so when people say, get over it, just forget it, and why do you need this art installation? You know, it's as close as my mother picking cotton as a little girl. It's as close as something was stolen from me, that many white people have this privilege of knowing their lineage. And that's a privilege to know where you came from. Same as it's a privilege to have a name and you know why you have this name. And I'm named after such and such. And this name has been passed down, you know, for generations through my family. But to not know that, I don't know my great grandmother's name. I have never met my great grandfather. I've never met my father's father. And I say father's father because I don't know his name. So even my grandfather, as close as my dad's father, I never met him and I don't know his name. That's how close this is to me and the importance of this project. So yeah, that's why I wrote Finding Me.
And with that said, we're going to show the video right now to the audience.
If I close my eyes, I can see them. And if I quiet myself, I can hear them. Their voices carry on the wind like the tune from chimes floating on a distant breeze. Who are you? Where did you come from? When you dreamed, what did you dream of? What is your story? What was your name before they gave you that name? Was the name passed down through our family? Am I your descendant? I stare at my face and wonder if I look like you. I try to put faces to shadows. Can I find pieces of your memory in cotton fields and red mud? Scattered bones in unmarked graves that attempted to erase you from history. But you were here. You were always here. You existed. Unknown, no longer. I found your name. I found you. And in finding you, I found me.
I mean, when you think that you wrote that before all of this project came to be is just amazing to me, Hannah. The most powerful thing to me, just listening to that, it seems, does it just seem like everything fell into place for you? It's almost like the fact that you wrote this and now this project, and it just fits perfectly with it.
I believe that I and us were just destined to tell this story. I think it all fell into place. The trip to Senegal, and I mean, out of all the places I could have went with my job, Natchez, Mississippi, it worked the way it was designed to work. And I believe it's because I remember Stacy, who took us back to Senegal, told us, you know, the blood always returns. She will always try to go back home. And I have said the blood will always cry out. people will always want to be known, that people just want to say, I was here, I existed, and those bones will cry out. They will surface, although not a Black. We saw what happened in Canada at this school, and they discovered over 200 bodies of Native American children because the bones will cry out. In that video, I stood in Goshen, Kentucky at Eleanor Bingham's farm. She's very open about this, that there is a slave cemetery there. And I asked her, how did you know that this was a slave cemetery? You know, it's acres of land. And she said, I ride my horses here, and the horses never wanted to come in this area, and we couldn't figure out why. And so they contacted an archaeologist and started digging, and indeed they found, I believe it's over 100 plus bodies of people that weren't enslaved there. Well, the horses wouldn't go there because the ground will speak, the people will speak. And so I have just been blessed to, and all of us to, I'm just a vessel to tell this story of Eve and Washington and so many enslaved women and girls named Hannah and Mary and William and just so many names. I've just been blessed to share that with Kentucky and the world. And for that, I'm honored if I can do that for them, because for all I know, that could have been my great, 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 great grandmother, grandfather. So here we are.
In that video, we saw people getting their feet painted, and I want to show that picture. And Josh, tell me, because in addition to Hannah's poem, in addition to the reconciliation benches, there is a journey that we're going to see. And tell us a little bit about these footprints and who they belong to in that story as well, that's part of this project.
Absolutely. So as we were conceptualizing Unknown Project, Sarah Lindgren came forward and said there is a multimodal infrastructure project, which is basically the river road is going to become narrower and one lane each way with a turn lane, and then we're going to gain 10 feet of bike walk path along the river walk between 4th and 7th Street. And she said they're just in the planning phase. I really think that Unknown Project could have some artistic components in this project if we start planning collaboratively with that planning team right now. And so as we were thinking about the description of freedom was just on the other side of the river, we all actually went, and Rachel and Hannah and Lana, a whole group of us went down to the narrowest part of the river where in the summer it would have been shallow enough that a very tall person could have walked across. And of course, this was before the Falls of the Ohio and everything was put in. And then in the winter, it could have been shallow enough to freeze over where people could have walked across the ice to Indiana. And so we were thinking about the concept of journey, and could we represent a couple of enslaved people walking along the edge of the Ohio River as if they were about to cross. So that was some of the initial ideas that we came up with. And then we said, well, we don't just want to, drop in stock photography. Let's identify Black Kentuckians and have their footprints be the footprints, the actual size of their footprints be the ones that are walking along the sidewalk. And so a journey in our footprints, which will be installed, all things constant, in kind of March, April, May 2022, will be almost a half mile of sandblasted and or lithochrome painted footprints from 4 Louisville community members. So Elmer Lucille Allen, who was the first Black chemist at Brown-Forman. I believe she's tuned in today. Hannah's daughter, Brianna Wright, who is also an activist here in Louisville, and Nigel Blackburn, who's one of the Youth Violence Prevention Research Center fellows. So we engaged those fellows. We went over to one of the Underground Railroad sites. They actually sat down to ideate with us around thinking about what would a family walking along the river have been thinking about? What would they have been hoping for? What would they have been afraid of? What are some of the things that would have been going through their mind? And then also Malik Barker, whose grandfather, Dr. J. Blaine Hudson, has done a tremendous amount of work in this space. And so having all of their contributions, their footprints, which will have been converted into laser cut stencils that are reusable because we're sandblasting. And when they told us, when we said we want to do almost a half mile of this journey to take you all the way to the installation featuring the benches, they kind of looked at us like, that's about $20,000 of stencil costs. But they got innovative, Stoneworks Lettering, working with another studio to find a solution that allowed us to visualize this, and then to have those same footprints featured on the edge of the platform where the installation will be facing Indiana. So you'll be able to be on the platform, you can sit on the benches, you can stand in the footprints, kind of facing across the river. Some of the footprints will have names. The first name of an enslaved Kentuckian, and one of them will say unknown, kind of really to embody that representation from the project.
And of course, this all happens on Saturday, and we're going to get to the exact times of that. It's going to start at Lamont's Place, Roots 101. And Lamont, congratulations on your grand opening. It was a wonderful crowd, and just so thrilled at the work that you're doing in our community. So we'll talk about that in just a second. I do want to get to a couple of questions from our audience. One is from Jean, and she said, how is Louisville at large reacting to the Unknown Project? Are people supportive, open to talking about it? Who wants to tackle that one?
I will say, truthfully, in Louisville and beyond, I've gotten any pushback for this project. Most people say it's long overdue. If not, it's time and it's long overdue. And most people in Kentucky have been extremely supportive of this project. So I was very happy to see that. It's just time. It's just time.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
Just to add to what, just to add to what Hannah was saying, I think one of the responses, especially with people sharing different historical documents, whether it's a ledger that was passed down from generations or just other documentation, was this kind of, I didn't know where to put this. Like, I've had it, I thought it should go somewhere. Maybe I hadn't searched out where to contribute it to, but kind of seeing the Unknown Project as a way that they can contribute is to then bring those documents forward and to share those, so that story, so that those names are coming forward. So I think that's been one of the kind of resounding shared things of, oh, I have this piece of information. How do I send it? How do I contribute it? And as part of Unknown Project, there will be a website launching later in the summer where people will be able to submit names and stories virtually, and it will populate on a map, so that we know that this isn't only a Louisville, it's not only a Kentucky story, it's a story of America. And we know that those people moved. So we're looking forward to having that as a component as well.
And this is just the start, we should say. I know Lamont's going to have things that tie into the Unknown Project, the Belle of Louisville, the Frazier History Museum. And then you wonder, would it not get bigger to go to other cities? And that's a thought after, Hannah visited Natchez, like you said, this story goes all down the river, which brings me to one of the questions. Another person said, I didn't know the phrase sold down the river originated or was about Louisville, and I lived here or there for 15 years. So Lamont, you had talked about that phrase earlier, sold down the river. Tell us a little bit about the origins of that.
Well, it wasn't just Kentucky. It was many places in the region that did not want to be sold to places that they were, one reason they didn't want to be sold from the family. So it's like, I don't want to be sold down the river, because Black families been sold without the permission all the time. So when I say down the river, it wasn't just Kentucky, but it was other states like Kentucky being shipped to places like Louisiana, sugarcane places and stuff like that. So it's a combination of places other than Kentucky, but it meant a lot in Kentucky because of what kind of slavery you were going into from a family standpoint.
Another question from somebody who's watching: why is there not a movement to change the names of Henry Watterson Expressway, and Gene Snyder Freeway due to the history and actions of those two figures. I know Henry Watterson we talked about in our suffrage exhibit just a little bit. Any thoughts on that from any of you all?
Well, that's going back to what I was saying about the tearing down of those memorials. I still believe that rather than tear down, the other part of that story needs to be told, and then that allows people to formulate their own ideas about what is wrong and what is right, because basically we all know what is wrong and what is right, but when you're fed one side of the story, at some point you begin to believe, well, that's it, that's all there is to it. And I just believe that there needs to be both sides truthfully told. I think one side has been told. We've had over 150, 200 years of telling one side of the story, and this is just the beginning. So what Hannah and Josh are doing is actually starting the narrative. Let's get the other side, but you tell it. We're not going to tell it for you. We've done that, and we see where that's gotten us. So we allow you to tell the story and give us your side, and let's take it from there. Not just one side, but both sides.
With that said, I want to bring up the flyer because we want people to hear this story, and we're inviting the public down on Saturday on Juneteenth. We're going to start at Roots 101. And Lamont, what's going to happen at Roots 101? Because that's at noon, correct?
Yeah, that's at noon. And Hannah is the coordinator of all that. So I let Hannah, I just open the door. How's that?
So we're good. All right, Hannah, you tell us what we're going to be doing. So we're going to actually start there. There are going to be a couple performances, right?
Right. We'll start at noon at Roots 101. The Young Prodigies, Justice Lou, and Rihanna Thornton, who is a poet in Louisville, will be performing there. And then we will begin our march to the site of the benches at about 12:30. So, I mean, it's still Juneteenth, and this is still a celebration day. So we will be marching to the site, and we will stop briefly along our walk at the Belle of Louisville, where there will be a presentation. Then we will continue on to our walk, arriving at the site of On the Banks of Freedom. And there, Brandon Ragland of the Louisville Ballet will be dancing. I've heard the song he's dancing to, and I thought, okay, I know I'm already gonna cry. Like, I need to get it all out now. But he'll be dancing. There will also be some type of spoken word performance by Justice Now, who's worked with us on this project. And tomorrow and Thursday, there will be a Juneteenth camp at Roots 101. We'll be starting that tomorrow to inform them and give them information for what they will write. And then we will dedicate this public art installation and have several speakers at the site. So I'm really, really looking forward to it. Really want the community to come out. I believe this is part of Louisville and Kentucky history. And so I really hope people will come out and celebrate with us and honor the names of those that have been discovered and names that we will simply never discover, that have just been lost to history.
In that final statement that you said, your hope. So I want to end this with each of you weighing in on what is your hope with this project, and the final words as we start wrapping up. So let me start with you, Lamont, your hope on Saturday and for this project.
Well, I hope that it continues to be part of the healing process, that not just in public spaces, Black people can do things in private places, and that we can have ownership in downtown Louisville. So I think it should go even further. I know Hannah feels the same, Josh feels the same. It's not just today, it should be 365 days a year that we move to the point where we all are accepted in all spaces in Louisville, Kentucky. And I think this is just beginning of that.
Josh?
Yeah, I agree with Lamont, and I think one of the reasons that there are so many different facets to the project is that we're really hoping to continuously engage people from across the city and people who come here, because we know people process information differently, but we don't want this, like Lamont said, this isn't a one-off. This is a journey that we're on together, and we really want the public art pieces, the exhibition components, the experience on the Belle of Louisville, it's all additive. And it all impacts how we understand and relate to each other as human beings, to our history as a city, and then think about how collectively do we create the future that we want, that is hopefully different and not a repetition of the past. And that's the hope, I know for me, through all of the different pieces coming together.
Sarah?
I guess my hope is that this project has just a continuous ripple effect, that it, this vision that started with, one person, two people, three people, and has grown and grown and grown into a larger collaborative group that has, been speaking for myself, a very inspirational collaboration. And I hope that it will inspire other artists, to pursue their vision and to seek out those collaborations, so that we have more, more projects like this and just more to look forward to in the future.
Dave?
I think from the beginning, when Duff and I started digging into the project, we saw it as a potential catalyst just in terms of benches all over the city. The idea of telling this story in lots of different places where it may be completely unexpected for someone to walk across a street and sit down and realize what they're sitting on. Beyond the benches, of course, sculptures and other aspects of public art can be enlisted to tell the story and complementary stories. But I agree with everyone. It's just the start of what we can do. And I'm glad to participate now, and I hope to be able to contribute in the future.
Duff?
I agree with all of the comments that were made here. I'm just going back now, just thinking about a young Ghanaian artist that was just here, Kwame Kodo Bamfo. He had a piece at the Kentucky African American Heritage Center, and one of the things that we talked for a minute, and he was saying that if you notice, a lot of the sculptures that have been taken down or that have glorified the Confederacy and all, they're up on pedestals. And his piece, and like a lot of my pieces, they're not put on pedestals. They start from the ground up. And I think that's where we should continue to tell our story, from the ground up. And I think that it will just really help all those that have fears about what we're trying to do and start looking at what we need to do. And that is tell the story from the ground up. So
I love that. Final word, Hannah?
I hope that Kentucky realizes and acknowledges this is the history of Kentucky, and that it is okay to tell the story. It's okay to release the names, and that we are better as a city and a state if we are telling all the stories. We will only be better and richer and fuller for it. So I hope that this is a step in simply telling the history of everyone in Kentucky.
Well, I can't thank you all enough for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. It's such an important step and journey that we're taking toward healing, not just for the city, but for the state and the entire country. And to our audience, thank you all for helping us navigate difficult conversations and caring enough to be part of the reckoning and bridging the divide. When we started these programs 2 years ago here at the Frazier History Museum, these are just the kinds of conversations that we wanted to have. So we thank you for that. And we hope to see you in person on Saturday. Thank you all again for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you all.